there's really nothing to our beliefs and assumptions. It's just they feel real and true because we maintain them with our attention. If we're believing the ego is something we have to transcend, we're actually misunderstanding what the ego actually is. What's possible for us is to apply practice to seeing through the illusion. So through practice, we get to start dismantling a structure that has felt like the totality of reality. And then through the dismantling process, which just means through being aware of it all, we began to see it's not as real and true as I thought it was.
Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today, I'm speaking with Caverly Morgan, spiritual teacher, author, and according to Mindful magazine, one of 2025's most powerful women in the mindfulness movement. Caverly blends the original spirit of Zen with a modern, relational, and non-dual approach to contemplative practice. Her journey begins in 1995 and includes 8 formative years in a silent Zen monastery. Since 2001, she's been teaching contemplative work rooted in presence, transformation, and collective liberation. Caverly is the founder of 2 powerful nonprofits, Peace in Schools, which launched the first 4-credit mindfulness course in U.S. public high schools, and Realizing Freedom Together, which is dedicated to making liberatory teachings accessible to all. In this conversation, we explored topics like the personal and collective ego, the suffering that arises from feeling separate from ourselves and from life at large, and how mindfulness, approached not as a productivity hack, but as a radical relational practice, can reconnect us to the heart of who we are.
Sam, it's so good to be here. It's so nice to connect with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. You are coming to Esalen on October 20th to 24th, 2025, and you're going to be teaching a workshop called Return to Belonging, the Heart of Who We Are. Just wondering if you could give sort of a synopsis of the course that you'll be offering.
Sure. What I love about this course is Esalen is the right place to hold it because what we're focusing on is the belonging that's inherent, the belonging that you don't have to strive to find or create. We're focusing on the belonging that's ever present. And what a better place to touch that experience than the land of Esalen. What a better place to remember that the very sense of belonging to ourselves, to each other, to the world, to the universe, all, it's right there, ever present. We just forget about it. And I feel that the land tends to remind people of what's always in the backdrop of our experience, you know?
So what do you think people will engage in or get out of this workshop at Esalen that'll be coming this fall?
Thanks, Sam. I love it. You're like, okay, girl, come back to the practical. Like, what are you doing during? So yeah, it involves some meditation. But what I really like about the approach to meditation in this course is it's a really gentle entry point. So we do a lot of meditation, but it's not the kind of meditation that's focused on, it's not heavy-handed with concentration practices. I love concentration practices, but this one's really about meditations that support the experience of resting in being. So very relaxed, open style of meditation, a lot of group activities. And in those group activities, we're getting in touch with not only our personal conditioning or the ways that we've been habituated by society, culture, family, friends on a personal level, but we're getting in touch with collective conditioning as well. And that's pretty fun to unpack in a group process. This is time that also involves some practices like walking meditation and practices that you can bring into your daily life once you leave Esalen. So it's got a bit of a toolkit along with it that people have reported is really supportive for once you leave the magic land of Esalen, where it's easy to remember your inherent belonging. I did train monastically in the Zen tradition for 8 years. It was an intense setting in that it was a strict and formal meditation setting for training. So the backdrop of the monastic experience was silent unless we were talking about practice in a formal setting. So it wasn't a whim. You know, I was in it to win it. And I feel that one of the things that I got in touch with there is the value of these concentration practices I just mentioned. I've really learned discipline in that setting, and that has served me deeply. And now I focus a lot more on the flip side of what I wasn't giving my attention to as much at the
Mm.
monastery. So I had this monastic experience, which was in the Zen tradition. And then upon leaving the monastery, I became more familiar with these non-dual teachings, which are helping us get directly in touch with the unity of being. So less of an approach that suggests that we have to take practices on and strive and, in a sense, purify the self in order to get to an experience that we long for. This more direct approach is about going straight to the experience of who we really are.
Wow, that is fascinating. I'm curious when one is training in the monastic tradition, is there a feeling that the self is inescapable? How do you apprehend the self when you're engaging in these practices for years on end?
Well, Sam, that is a really awesome question. And I think for us, but mostly for our listeners, it would probably be good if we define self, right? So, tell me what you mean. It's funny, isn't it? We walk around all the time. We're like,
Yeah.
yeah, myself. But like, what the hell are we even talking about? Like, have we defined it? So tell me, when you say self is inescapable, how are you referring to self?
I guess just off the top of my head, and this is thinking about it kind of unconsciously, I'll identify my unconscious ideas about it. The self is sort of like me, my roles, what I do, the way that I am, the way that I imagine people think about me.
Yeah, beautiful. So that's the way we were talking about self when I was training monastically, like this sense that we talked about self as, let's just use the word ego, but that should be unpacked too because that gets thrown around so much. So I talk about the ego as the activity of the conditioned mind. So this mind that's been habituated by society, friends, family, culture,
Mm.
past experiences. So that self, this egoic self, is the self that walks around in life and puts itself center stage. Everything's revolving around it. I like to talk about it as like I, me, my mind.
Yep.
And in the monastic approach I was trained in, we're paying attention to how that self forms, what that self is made of, like how it operates in the world, how it can create suffering if we're always identified with that self, right? Like if I'm walking around in I, me, my mind, how available am I to connect with you?
Mm.
If I'm like totally identified with I, me, my mind, like let's go to the view of like a type of narcissism, then you're just some kind of reflection of me. Like you're here to either prop me up but it's actually, come on, Sam, it's all about me,
Right.
right?
Yes,
And
totally.
so, what was powerful about leaving the monastery and stumbling upon a different approach was that in that approach, this is the non dual approach, self is defined with a capital S. And I bet there are a lot of people listening that are familiar with like big self, the self that is beyond this limited, constricted view of self.
Right, like a genuine self, the way that Richard Schwartz in Internal Family System defines self with a capital S as sort of like this is something that you can really trust. This really is that internal player that's not about ego projections.
Exactly. And that internal self, what's beautiful about it is that's where the inherent belonging is. The self with a capital S. When we are in touch with that self, we're clear that there isn't anything outside belonging, and that all these things happening in our conditioned world, all the strife that we're seeing right now, as you and I speak, all the pain, all the suffering, personally and collectively, that's happening, that's all happening because there's a collective forgetting of self with a capital S, in
Mm,
my view.
mm.
We're so identified with that small self, with the constricted self, that we have the capacity to cause harm. We're in survival mode. We're in fight or flight mode. That if I'm identified with small self, then you're in my freaking way, man. I've
Yeah.
got a place to go. I've got something
Mhm.
I need. There are limited resources. You are a threat to me. And that's how we can get into a lot of trouble. Obviously, as we're seeing, we don't have to look far.
We spoke about personal ego, the small self. How would you define collective ego, and why is that an important concept for us to grasp?
Yeah, thank you. So this ego, it's the illusion of a self that's separate from life. It's actually not a self at all, though. As I mentioned, it's simply the activity of the conditioned mind. And so if we're identified with this activity, if we follow that storyline, we feel separate, and then therefore, no shocker, we behave and act in the world as if we're separate. And I have found, and though we didn't focus this on this a lot in my monastic training, that the same is true collectively. We
Okay.
have a collective ego that asserts its apparent reality. Even though in both cases, um, this ego can't be found anywhere. So the collective ego, that was really kind of roundabout, given you asked me to define this. The collective ego is that same activity of the conditioned mind, but now it's being applied to how we view an entire group. Now it's group identity.
Mm. Hmm.
So when we think of personal ego, we're thinking about personal identity. This is I, me, mine. But now when we're looking at collective ego, we're looking at how an entire group identifies itself, defines itself, makes another group other than,
Mm.
wants to attack another group because the same process of a survival strategy is being threatened.
So yeah, I'm imagining that you're speaking about like our collective ego as us as Americans, or us as Republicans, us
Exactly.
as the Yankees, and you
Yep.
or something like that.
Totally. Exactly. And it's interesting in so many spiritual practices, there's a lot of attention brought to what the personal ego is, how to break down the personal ego, how to see through the
Mhm.
personal ego. In some cases, I think people spend years fixated on how to transcend the personal ego. And this we could apply the same thing collectively, but in many places we're not focused on that. We're not thinking about that.
Mhm.
And just to back up, because I said it, but I wouldn't want to be kind of quoted with it, I want to be clear. I'm sort of putting transcend the ego in quotes. So if we're believing the ego is something we have to transcend, we're actually misunderstanding what the ego actually is. I mean, there is no such thing as an enlightened ego. So I want to be clear that's true collectively too. But
Okay.
what's possible for us is to apply practice to seeing through the illusion of the personal ego. Many people who would be coming to Esalen already have a practice in place that's doing that. And we can do the same thing collectively is really the
Well,
point I'm
okay.
trying to make here.
All right. Well, I'm super curious about that because I see a lot of groups that I would love for them to transcend their ego. It would make my life a lot easier. I mean, how is that even done? If you have like, if you want to
Yeah.
address the shared narcissism and craziness of, for example, like the Democratic, National Convention, all the people who are there, the inability to seize on the opportunities that are in front of them because they're too focused on their petty concerns. How would you address the collective ego of hundreds or thousands or even millions of people?
In a way, exactly the same way we, through spiritual practice, address the personal ego. So, in my experience, starting to get a feel for how this ego, and again, it's illusory, it's a hologram of sorts,
Uh-huh.
right? There's really nothing to our beliefs and assumptions. It's just they feel real and true because we maintain them with our attention. So through practice, we get to start dismantling a structure that has felt like the totality of reality.
Mm.
And then through the dismantling process, which just means through being aware of it all, we began to see it's not as real and true as I thought it was. So, as an example, a personal belief that I have to work really hard in order to be loved, or otherwise I can't be loved. I have to get everything just right in order to be loved. That through practice is just a belief system that I get to see through.
Mm.
I get to be like, wait a second, wait a second. I don't have to base all my relationships off that belief system. Like, how many romantic partners do I have to run through in order to find out that's actually, I don't have to keep repeating the same patterns in my relationship. So the same thing's true collectively. We have entire collective patterns of thought and belief, which lead to behavior. That's the important part here. Thoughts and beliefs aren't such a big deal if there aren't behaviors that are on the other end of them.
Mm.
But the thought and belief that we are separate has a lot of fallout on the other side, right? So an example would be I can remember a time when no one had talked to, I grew up in Virginia, no one talked to me about implicit bias. I'm not saying that Virginia means that no one talked to me about it, but I'm just acknowledging it's not like I grew up in like a really radical education system in the Bay Area where maybe people are talking about implicit bias when you're like in third grade. Right. So there might be places where kids are learning that much earlier than I learned it, but it wasn't in Central Virginia where I was growing up.
Yeah, I'm from Chapel Hill.
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah, implicit
Informed.
bias skipped my school system as well.
Yeah, it's just not woven in. But
Hmm.
that's a collective process that's incredibly powerful to see through. So
Hmm.
that would be an example of how a whole entire collective could shift. Imagine
Mm.
if in this country right now, and I know this won't air today, but it feels significant that we're talking on Juneteenth, right? Like imagine if a whole entire white-bodied collective was bringing collective attention to implicit bias in the same way that people in that collective might have been having a practice where they are bringing attention to their own personal
Mm.
negative self-talk
Yeah.
so that they can disidentify from it, so they can see through it. Well, the implicit bias is just collective internal self-talk. It's a whole group, it's like groupthink. And so imagine if a whole group was able to see how this negative self-talk was manifesting in the group. Imagine how that would affect other groups, society, culture at large.
So, as a change maker, as a teacher, and as an educator, it sounds like the process to address collective ego would actually be a little bit different than the process to address personal ego. When I hear you talking about personal ego, I can see you like working with people in a small meditation class, working on just self, perhaps in the monastic tradition. How would one instigate the process of working on the collective ego?
So with a small group of people, I might take that group through practices like, okay, get your journal out and fill in the blank just to reveal your own conditioned habit of mind. And it would be things like, in order to be loved, I need to fill in the blank.
Uh,
In order to, it might be something like, I was taught that I should be afraid of, right? We're just getting in touch with our personal conditioning, how we've been taught we need to be to survive in the world. It's really powerful when you have a group of people and you can do that same exercise, but do it as a collective. This is
uh,
why
hmm
my favorite thing since I wrote the book, The Heart of Who We Are, that I've done is create practice collectives where people go through the book as a group, and then we get to say, okay, now stand in the position of being identified consciously with a certain collective in your life.
mm,
So me walking through those prompts as, since we're talking about the South, like a Southern white-bodied woman is going to create a really different response than someone who's a person of color from a different part of the country,
hmm
right? And then we get to look together in the safety of the environment we've created, as safe as possible. You can never guarantee safety in groups, but as much as possible, we've created a consciously safe as possible, again, environment. I have to underline that because you just can't guarantee it. But it's powerful how much in, for example, the retreat I'll do at Esalen, you can bring a lot of attention to creating spaces where people are willing to open this shit up. This is stuff that's been hidden, locked in boxes for eons, sometimes generations. And for us to, in a shared space, unpack,
hmm
some of this collective conditioning is very not only personally liberating, but it ends up being collectively liberating too. It's collectively liberating for people to bring forward the shit that's actually not real or true, but that we've been operating out of as if it is.
mm,
When I'm teaching, I almost not always, but I often intentionally partner with a BIPOC facilitator because if we're doing collective work, it's really important to have representation and, not just one white-bodied facilitator facilitating like a mixed race space. So for this particular Esalen retreat, I'm doing it on my own, but in many cases, I'm partnered for my summer retreat at Whidbey Island. It's me, and for anyone who's just listening and not seeing me, white-bodied woman, a woman named Lovely, who's a Black woman, and Brian Tan, who's a Vietnamese man, and we're kind of collaborating, and they're bringing in movement practices. So that's an important part of my work, and I would love to see that, in a sense, televised. Just haven't ever explored it.
Do you feel like things like white supremacy and patriarchy are forms of threatened collective ego?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, Sam. It's those are really good examples of how collective ego manifests. There's actually nothing to something like patriarchy other than thought forms and belief systems. There's
Mhm.
nothing really there. It's a hologram of sorts, just like the ego is. So again, something like patriarchy or white supremacy, that those things arise out of the distortion that I am separate,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's just collective limitation, collective process arising out of personal distortion, like the view that I am separate, right? It's a quick jump to we are separate.
Well, how do you disabuse somebody of the idea that I am separate? I mean, I'm just thinking about like, let's imagine that somebody who wasn't woke, liberal person was listening to this podcast and they heard the words patriarchy and white supremacy, and they're like, I might just turn this off. And before their hand reaches for that pause button, how would you, as a teacher or an educator, begin to try to help them realize that, in fact, they are not separate, that dualistic thinking like that actually reinforces suffering?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Well, I think by the nature of our conversation, it probably would have gotten turned off now, but I like your idea that what
Yeah.
if it hadn't? What if someone hadn't turned it off quite yet? Because to be honest, I am interested in what's beyond preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that's most important for anybody, I don't care what door you're walking through from, to be able to recognize is what we're talking about here. It's beyond what has been lumped into this category of quote unquote woke politics. We're talking about how we all suffer when we view ourselves to be separate from ourselves, separate from each other, separate from life at large. And so if I'm believing a whole other group of people is separate from me, we're taught that there's a type of power in that. We're taught that we get type of energy out of like, hey, I'm on top, right? It's a power over energy. And what people who are raised in a power over context, which is all of us, what if we're not bringing attention to that, then we're missing that what's possible is power with,
Mm.
right? And so to be locked in this power over construct, the first thing that can be empowering is to recognize there's suffering for me in that. It doesn't feel good to be on the top of the shoe with somebody underneath the shoe. And we collectively aren't encouraged to bring a lot of attention to the degree in which I'm suffering if I'm on top of the shoe. Because our collective conditioning has us duped into thinking that's powerful. It is powerful to be on top,
Mm.
right? So to really look deeply and see, wait, is that powerful, or actually am I just separate from my neighbor?
Mm.
And a lot of people, one of the reasons I'm interested in this topic is a lot of people grow up in environments where they don't even get a chance to truly see their neighbor because they're so seeped in the collective conditioning that says, don't look at them, stay on top, get on top, be on top. And we're seeing that across our country like crazy right now.
When I think about the society that we're living in right now, it feels so bifurcated. And I don't feel that people on either side of that bifurcation are necessarily that interested or open to changing their point of view through listening or comments on social media and I'm wondering if you've had more success with introducing experiential modalities like meditation. I could just imagine that some of these teachings that you're attempting to push forward might be absorbed more readily if people are engaging in actual experience rather than discussion.
I think it's absolutely critical, Sam. I really do. I think you just got to the heart of something because I do deeply appreciate, I actually was just at a protest. So I deeply appreciate what protest avails, for example, what becomes possible because of something like protest.
Mm,
And I'm most interested in the change that's not happening on that relative plane level. Again, I want to be really clear. It's not a hierarchy for me, but what I feel most called to. What I mean by not a hierarchy, I mean one's not better than the other. So what I'm referring to here is relative plane change, where we're changing policy, changing laws, in the streets with our signs. Then I'm also referring, when I talk about these sort of two forms, I'm referring to the absolute. I'm referring to that place of inherent belonging that you and I started off our conversation with. I'm most interested these days on offering people direct experience, supporting people and having direct experience of that absolute unity of being, because I think on the relative plane that informs our actions. So if I'm coming from the understanding that you and I are one, my actions are going to look really different. Instead of like my habit would be to meet the construct of power over with more power over energy and
yeah.
to just be fighting the fight.
Yes.
That is not bad or wrong. There might be a really important place for that in society, but that's not what I'm most drawn to. What I'm most drawn to is how the hell are we going to get out of that dynamic? I think we have to actually have direct experience
Mm.
of our true nature. And then that's the experience that will inform how we act with each other. And so that's why I'm most interested in creating spaces where anybody and everybody who comes gets to have that experience. So I don't care what doorway you're walking in through. I don't care what color you are. I don't care if you're queer. I don't care if you're straight. I don't care if you're cisgendered. I don't care what your political affiliation is. What's required is openness to know your true nature so that, again, then your actions can be informed by that knowing.
You speak about offering this direct experience of our true nature, and that can be sort of like a pivot or a change within society. My question is, how do you get people to experience their true nature who are actually like high on being on top in this power dynamic that you spoke about earlier? Because what I'm hearing from you, I can see it from you that you live for this teaching and the ability to help people make positive change. What has been successful for you in the past in bringing people along on this ride who might not even want to go on it?
For some people, going straight to the experience of who you truly real, who you truly are is all that's required in order to want more of that, right? Like for some people, if you
Mm,
just go straight to the experience of being, and then you get to feel for yourself that the peace and happiness we all strive for is right there in being, that's enough to have a person want to have more and more and more of that, and then start to want to learn how to stabilize in that experience of being so that they can live their life from being. For some people, and I was one of these people, I really needed to break apart how I've been conditioned. I needed to see the egoic structures. I needed to unpack my beliefs and assumptions. I needed to see how I've been getting identified with the conditioned mind. And as I got to see how I've been identified with the conditioned mind, I began to have more and more experiences of not only who I'm not, because all the things in our conditioning is who we're not. I got to see not only who I'm not, I got to have more, that seeing who I'm not freed me up to have more experiences of who I actually am.
Mm-hmm.
So in
Mm-hmm.
some spiritual traditions, that's called the neti process. I'm not these thoughts, I'm not these emotions, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. And then we come upon who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people, that approach is really supportive. And then we find out who we really are. So for example, if I was speaking with someone who's like, oh, hell no, I'm not meditating. Like, hell no, am I going to sit down and be still? A really powerful thing might be to then just focus on what the mind is doing, but do it through journaling, do it through conversation, do it through unpacking belief systems and thoughts, and then have it be a process where someone can start to feel comfortable finding out what's there underneath all the thoughts. For another person, they're just like, I just want to meditate. I just want to be still. I just want to be quiet. And now let's go straight to the experience of being.
I have a theory that people won't seek out this disengagement from the ego game unless they are unhappy or uncomfortable. I'm curious with you if you're open to it, speaking about like what led you to engage in that monastic 8-year experience in the first place.
Oh yeah. I mean, oh yeah, look at me. I'm not your classic I just long to be a monk. That's my calling. That was not my calling. And I say look at me because I do feel like I'm an unlikely candidate to
Hmm.
go be silent in a monastery for 8 years. The Buddha said once, apparently, who the hell knows, here we are 2,600 years later, but apparently he said people get drawn to a path of awakening for two different reasons.
Hmm.
Some people come in through the door of intelligence. They just see intellectually that there's got to be more going on. There's got to be a bigger picture to this thing we call the nature of reality. Some people come through the door of suffering. My first Zen teacher used to call the monastery the last stop. And what she meant by that was if you're coming here, you've done therapy, you've done group work, you've done whatever other thing, AA, whatever, you have tried it, you've been there, you've done that. Now you're ready for this highly disciplined lifestyle that's kind of going to kick your ego in the ass.
Mm.
And that's not the door I actually came in through. I was not someone who was severely depressed. I actually did have panic attacks in high school, and I struggled a lot with how to be in relationship with my anxiety.
Mm.
But it wasn't wanting to get out of my anxiety that drew me to the monastery. It was more of a blend of the intelligence piece and the suffering piece. And what I mean by that is I was so in the dark that when I first started stumbling upon all these teachings, the light was so blinding that I couldn't not want to find out, like, what the hell is this light?
Mm.
Like, when I went on my first Zen retreat, people were talking about negative self-talk. And they were revealing that voice of like the inner critic in their head.
Okay.
And I kid you not, I thought everybody was crazy. I was like, what the hell is this experience? This clearly, at least everybody here needs therapy. Like, what's going on? Like, I literally believe, Sam, that I didn't have a voice in my head.
Okay.
I was like, these other people crazy because I don't have any voices in my head. So I didn't even understand how much my own conditioned mind was dictating how I behaved in the world. I didn't even understand that there was something beyond the view of I, me, my mind that we were talking about before. So once I started to have these experiences of, holy shit, there's a lot more going on. I don't have to just follow this program of, work your ass off, get married, have kids, make a lot of money and then die. The curiosity about what else is possible consumed me.
What do you think our chances are for addressing our collective ego? Like in this moment, I think a lot about technology and artificial intelligence and creativity. And something that comes up in the classes that I teach at Esalen is the increasing individualization of our society. And you can see that with just how much people are on their phones, how much they're on social media. And now people are even beginning to have relationships with chatbots. They're using AI for therapy and they're finding it, as good or better than or more convenient than or more engaging than conventional therapy with an actual human being. So we're seeing this increase in time that people are spending essentially with themselves. How much hope do you have for our ability to address a collective issue?
Sam, I have hope because I have to have hope. Like, we get to choose in this life how we want to be in relationship with what is. And what is what is, right? Like, I hear people talking about, like, oh, we shouldn't use AI. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know what reality you're living in, but this train has left the station.
It's left the station.
So it's left the station, y'all. So the question is, how are we going to be in relationship with it? What is that
Uh-huh.
going to look like?
Okay.
For example, in this program I started, Peace in Schools, we've got teenagers practicing mindfulness in the public school system. And I can't tell you how many parents have said, like, we have to create a scenario where we can have them never having phones. And I'm like, so way impossible at this point. So the question becomes, can you create a class that is so engaging, that is so relational, that so breaks past all these conditioned barriers, that leads people to feel isolated and want to have the only way they can feel connected be this like cheap, falsy membership and belonging that happens through the phone?
Mm-hmm.
Can you create an experience that's so powerful? These teens don't even look for their freaking phones.
Mm-hmm.
That is so much more powerful than we're going to just restrict something, which is it's like saying, it's like, I don't know about you, but like back in the day when they were like abstinence, like who the
Yeah.
hell, what kind of approach to like safe sex is abstinence?
It's
Like
just unrealistic.
it's unrealistic. So we get to choose how we're going to be in relationship with what is. And the reason I feel filled with hope, it's not some airy fairy Pollyanna thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because my whole life is dedicated to this practice, these teachings, I get to see every day people transformed through them. And I do actually believe there's that old saying about like what in the darkest times, like one light can make such a powerful difference. Well, in have you heard the phrase Kali Yuga?
No.
It just refers to an era of deep darkness. So if anyone's interested, they can look that up. There's a lot of interesting history about this kind of framing of like the time we're in. So in deep dark times, one light really, really makes a difference. So what's that one light like now when it's a whole collective? I have seen that it's brighter than our conditioned minds can even imagine. So I don't fear that we're in a dark time. I have a practice of redirecting my attention to what I've actually seen in my own directed experience regarding the power of what's possible as we redirect the attention and as we focus on the light.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you're really speaking about is relational dharma that can support the healing of both personal and collective patterns of separation.
These teachings, the Dharma is just another way to talk about teachings. These teachings, they're not going to happen. I think gone are the days of we all want to see a guru at the front of the room that has all the answers. I think we're in an era, Thich Nhat Hanh said, the next Buddha may be a Sangha. And we all know the Buddha is just an analogy for an awakened one. But Sangha, for those that don't know, just means the community of people who practice together. So if someone comes on retreat with me, they're part of that Sangha. So to think that the next awakened one might be a collective, might not just be some individual with quote unquote all the answers, is a powerful image. And I've seen that play out. I mean, in the classrooms, the Peace in Schools classrooms, when you get a whole crew of teens suddenly relating to each other from the seat of who they truly are rather than who they've been conditioned to be, that's collective transformation.
Hmm. Caverly Morgan, you'll be teaching at Esalen from October 20th to 24th, 2025. Return to belonging, the heart of who we are. And there's a beautiful selection from your course description. Most of us are deeply habituated to believe that we are separate from one another, from the world, and even from ourselves. We're habituated to fall for the story that we must fix ourselves in order to earn and experience deep connection. And we forget that belonging is already seated in the heart of who we are, that is always available if only we look within. When we do, we can transform far more than just our own lives. Been so great to talk with you today, Caverly.
You too, Sam. Thanks so much again for having me on and for being such a great conversationalist. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Esalen. This episode was produced in conjunction with Shira Levine. Our theme song is by Nico Holloman. Until next time, be well.